Hello, thank you for attending today's presentation. This is a data visualization final presentation for CSC 302. And today we're going to look at visualizing the data for two different data sets. It will be Super Bowl history from 1967 to 2018, and then Super Bowl ads from 2000 to 2020. And the presentation is presented by yours truly, Neil Hunter. Now, let's look at the two different data sets that we're going to be using today. The first data set, Super Bowl history, we're going to look at the attributes for the year, the team, coach, location, points, and attendance. And for Super Bowl ads, we're going to look at the attributes for year, brand, funny, dangerous, animal, and celebrity. Now, the questions that were asked for the Super Bowl history data set is what team has won the most Super Bowls from 1967 to 2018? What trends do we see with the Super Bowl points difference? What coach has won the most Super Bowls from 1967 to 2018? What city has hosted the most Super Bowls from 1967 to 2018? What state has hosted the most Super Bowls from 1967 to 2018? And what trends do we see for the Super Bowl attendance for the 52-year span? Let's take a look at the first graph. And the question that was asked was, what team has won the most Super Bowls from 1967 to 2018? And this graph clearly shows the New England Patriots leading the pack with 10 Super Bowl wins. Now, looking at this graph, you can see there's several teams that have all tied for the same amount of wins. It's pretty easy to see that. Tied for second, Denver Broncos, Dallas Cowboys, and the Pittsburgh Steelers are all tied with 8. And then you can see some other teams that have tied for 5, 4, 3, and 2, and then 1. So it looks like, more than half of the teams looks like have only won 1 or 2 Super Bowls, and then the rest have actually been pretty impressive, winning more than 2. This graph says, what trends do we see with the Super Bowl points difference? So looking at the difference in the Super Bowl wins versus losses, the points for each team, this graph shows an average of around a 15-point difference over the 52-year span. Looks like the trend is the points difference is actually getting smaller. And it's pretty interesting also to look at that, yes, the average was 15 points difference between the winner and the loser. But if you look from the 1980s through most of the 1990s, you can see there were some pretty large point differences, being that, you're looking at over 25 all the way up to 45 points difference. And looking at the data, the fact that it looks like there has been some pretty big wins in the recent history, but the majority of the difference in points is getting smaller, and it tells me that the particular, I'd say the matchups between the two best teams in the NFL meeting for the Super Bowl tells me that they're definitely a little bit tougher with each other, and the fact that the talent is definitely getting really competitive. So pretty interesting to see that. Now, the next is, what coach has won the most Super Bowls from 1967 to 2018? Now, this graph shows there's been 2 coaches that have both won more than 4 Super Bowls. Actually, I'm sorry, 4 Super Bowls. And Bill Belichick of the New England Patriots and Chuck Noll from the Pittsburgh Steelers have won more Super Bowls than any other coach. Now, looking at this, you can see that some of the other big ones that we're pretty familiar with, Bill Walsh and Don Shula, Joe Gibbs back in the day, Tom Flores and Tom Landry, those guys, Vince Lombardi, it's pretty cool. A majority of these coaches have only won one Super Bowl. Now, what city has hosted the most Super Bowls from 1967 to 2018? Now, this graph shows the New Orleans has doubled all other hosting cities for the Super Bowl with 10 times hosted. Now, what I look at here, the New Orleans Superdome, yeah, it's a very popular Super Bowl destination. For one, it's warm down there. But looking at some of these other cities, there are some cities in the same state where New Orleans is representing the whole state of Louisiana here. But looking at, Miami, Florida, Miami Gardens, Florida, which is right next door to Miami. They've also hosted in Jacksonville, Florida. You've got Detroit and Pontiac, two locations here in Michigan. Who would have ever thought? But California has multiple locations. So it's pretty interesting to see that, yeah, one location has dominated, but that doesn't necessarily represent that the whole state of Louisiana has hosted more. Let's take another look. Let's go deeper into that. And here's another visualization to show the number of Super Bowls hosted by the city. And this is just another way to visualize the data using a pie chart. Okay, so clearly you can see New Orleans is leading the pack, but you can see Florida there, Florida, then California. I mean, it's pretty interesting to see it like this. But now let's take another dive into to see what state has hosted the most Super Bowls from 1967 to 2018. Now, you'd think Louisiana, but let's look at this. With 4 locations in Florida, they actually take the cake with 15 Super Bowls that were hosted in the state of Florida. California coming in a close second with 12. And then you see Louisiana sitting right there with the 10, with that one location in New Orleans. But this graph pretty much shows that, majority of these Super Bowls are held in southern states. And with the Super Bowl being, late January and early February now, more these days, that's winter time and it's colder in the northern states. And, why not host in the warm weather? Be nice to your fans and be nice to the teams. But pretty cool still to see Michigan up there with 2 Super Bowls hosted. And, the fact that these northern states have domes, covered stadiums, that's always nice. But, a lot of the Super Bowl activities are away from the stadium outside. So it makes it a little tougher to host in those northern states. Let's take a look at what trends do we see for the Super Bowl attendance for the 52-year span. Now, this graph shows, apart from 6 Super Bowls at about 100,000 or more in attendance, most of the Super Bowls have been at smaller stadiums between 70,000 and 90,000. And looking at this data, you can see all those big marks that go all the way up to past 100,000. I can imagine those are most likely the New Orleans Superdome. They hold a lot of people and they've hosted a lot of Super Bowls, but not necessarily the case for some of these other stadiums. The Super Bowl is typically a sold out game, and looking at the attendance numbers shows that some of these other stadiums are absolutely smaller. And then, as you can see in the later years, it looks like it's trending down as well, to where some of the Super Bowls are held in newer stadiums, which are built particularly around how many people do you want in your stadium. So interesting graph here to see that say it's pretty close to say that the average is more like 75,000. Now let's take a look at the Super Bowl ads data set. The questions that were asked were, what brand had the most Super Bowl ads from 2000 to 2020? What trends over the 20-year period have been the most popular? And does one brand like a particular theme the most? And then finally, based on the data, which brand dominated from 2000 to 2020? So the first graph here, what brand had the most Super Bowl ads from 2000 to 2020? Now, Bud Light is by far the largest advertiser from this group of brands with a total of 60 ads in a 20-year span. Now, keep in mind the brands that you see here, Bud Light, Budweiser, Doritos, Pepsi, Hyundai, Coca-Cola, E-Trade, Kia, and the NFL. These are the only brands that were in this data set. That's not the only brands that have Super Bowl commercials. So there were a lot of brands left out, but just analyzing this set of brands, Bud Light, Bud Light and Budweiser are both two of the most dominating Super Bowl commercials. This is just another graph, a visual of the same data we just looked at, and it actually is a little bit different to see it this way. You know, you see Bud Light and Budweiser just clearly far from the pack with this graph. Versus this one, it's just it's clearly a difference there. Now let's take a look at the Super Bowl ads for the animal theme. And the question asked was, what trends over the 20-year period have been the most popular for the animal theme? Now, Budweiser has been known for their use of Clydesdales in Super Bowl ads for many years. They had the most animal themed ads over this 20-year span. And it does show that Bud Light came in a close second. But, you know, when I think of a Super Bowl ad from Budweiser, I always think of the Clydesdales. Oh, I'm sorry. Take note at the bottom of this graph, the NFL had no animal theme ads. Now, this question, what trends over the 20-year period have been the most popular for the celebrity themed ads? And Pepsi had the most celebrity-themed Super Bowl ads amongst these brands from 2000 to 2020, with a close second of Bud Light. Bud Light's just trying to be dominant over everybody. But, you know, when I think of a Pepsi commercial for the Super Bowl, I do remember Cindy Crawford, but I do know that the most recent celebrities that have been used in Pepsi commercials, their whole trademark for that, their whole branding for that commercial is at the very end, the celebrity opens up that can of Pepsi and takes a big drink. And that's just this picture just says it all. This is what you remember in a Pepsi commercial at a Super Bowl. Now, take note at the bottom, E-Trade had no celebrity theme ads. Now, looking at this theme, funny or dangerous, from 2000 to 2020, the funny themed Super Bowl ads were more popular than the dangerous themed ads, and Bud Light led in both categories. Well, that makes sense to me because when I think of a funny themed Super Bowl ad, I want to laugh. You know, the themed ads are always nice to see too, but you know, everyone wants to be happy. So laughing, it just brings on happiness. Let's look at the data. So what trends over the 20-year period have been the most popular when we're looking at dangerous theme versus funny theme? So let's take a look. Now, it already said the funny themed ads were more popular and by far. You have Bud Light with the most dangerous theme ads, and you're looking at 28, and you know, Doritos is sitting at 11. And so that's a huge difference though. Bud Light dominating again. But Bud Light in the funny thing ads dominating again, but with 57. That's insane. More than double of their danger theme ads. So funny theme is really where it's at. And you can see all the other brands, I'd say, you know, they're all looking at over 10, majority of them. And you could barely get to 10 with the danger theme ads. Take note, NFL had no danger theme ads. Now, Does one brand like a particular theme the most? Let's look at Bud Light. This is the Bud Light funny ads over the 20-year stretch. And the data shows the most popular theme for a Super Bowl ad is the funny theme. Bud Light had the funniest theme ads from 2000 to 2020, and this chart shows that Bud Light used more funny themed ads during their first 10 years of this data set, and they are currently trending down. So let's look. Now, you can see, they started in 2002, hitting, 4, and then the next year they hit 7, and then the next year they hit 5, and they went down, and then they go. So the trend showing is that it looks like they eased into some funny themed ads, hit 7, and then took the gas off the pedal a little bit, and then went back up, and then slowed back down again. So I wonder if they were just testing out their own data as well, where they were trying to see, what were people saying about the funny themed ads, because they have trended downward. And aside from 2019 with 4, it does show that, they are taking a little bit of a different theme. They're not going with funny theme as much. Now let's look at the brand domination from 2000 to 2020, and based on the data, which brand dominated from this 20-year span. And this chart clearly shows that Bud Light with the most brand domination in Super Bowl ads. Budweiser was a close second, with Doritos and Pepsi tying for third. Now, this graph shows a different way. Instead of looking at a bar graph, it shows to visualize the data in size, right? So, you see Bud Light clearly has the bigger bubble there. Budweiser, Pepsi and Doritos and Hyundai and Coca-Cola all have a very similar size bubble. And then the last 4 are all a lot smaller. But it definitely shows domination in this type of visualization. And Bud Light and Budweiser really, really taken both of those categories. Now, this last slide is the references of where you can find the images I've used in my presentation. And I thank you for attending my presentation, and I hope you have a wonderful day.